both major parties continue to hemorrhage votes ahead of this soon-to-be-called election. When's it going to be? I don't know, according to the latest poll numbers. Let's break it all down with the Director of Corporate Affairs and Communications at the Redbridge Group. You know him well, Tony Barry. Tony, thank you so much for coming on again. Great to have you here. Love your Bush shirt there. I'm not sure which campaign that's from.
Which file?
But in the latest Redbridge poll, Labour now has got a lead back over the coalition, 51-49. Tell us about it.
Yeah, there's been a softening of the Liberal primary, but also the Labor primary. The Liberal primary has softened much more. And that is translating into a small increase in the 2PP for Labor. However, as I say every time I'm on your show, the soft vote is 48% on this particular poll, and that is a massive soft vote. You go back to the Howard era, and it was in the 20s. In the WA election a couple of weeks ago, it was 22% soft a few weeks out. So these are extraordinarily high numbers, and they're looking for an idea or some hope to vote for a particular candidate. It might be a signature policy, which might drive them into their column, or of course could push them away from their column into their opponent's column. So you're going to see a lot of numbers bounce around, I think, for the next few weeks until one leader really seizes the agenda.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, with this, I'm fascinated by some of the numbers when you dive into this. We find that people are voting or saying that they blame Chris Bowen and they blame Albanese and they blame Labour for their high energy prices, and yet they don't seem to necessarily be quite ready to make a change, some of them. And in fact, some of them, even if they know that that the handouts and so on are inflationary, they still want them too. It seems like the electorate hasn't quite dialed in on this yet.
Well, the energy issue is really interesting. And of course, you know, as John Howard used to say, the electorate will usually get it right. And they've sort of got it right on this because they're not seeing a sort of holistic sort of energy policy on either side. Nuclear has its merits, of course, but there's also some political risk and time sort of factor as well. But on the polling was quite interesting insofar as 53% agreed with the statement that renewable energy is pushing prices through the roof, which is a statement coalition uses. So you often test statements from government and opposition to see how willing the electorate is to agree with it. So 53% agreed with that statement, which is very bad news for the Albanese government. But then when you asked, is nuclear energy going to be cheaper, there was a net plus 10 for the coalition, which is a good sign. It went up 2%. So that kind of message from the coalition is working, and the opposition's attempts to scare the electorate about the cost is not working at all. Those arguments are not landing. However, when you ask about the safety question, and this is consistent in all our research, particularly with female voters, there has been some significant movement since we last tracked this question, which was 8 months ago. 8 months ago, and in fact, I think you covered it, James, in the Daily Telegraph, when you put the statement to them that nuclear energy is unsafe, so we framed it as a negative, it was net zero. So people were not prepared to believe that on a net basis. It was 39 versus 39. Now it's net minus 6. So Labor's messaging on that is landing, and people are sort of reconsidering nuclear on that basis. So it's very, very fluid, and it's up for grabs to be won, this debate.
Well, you know, you mentioned the female vote, too, and, you know, how concerns around safety and things like that tend to land, particularly with female voters. I've been very curious, Tony, about how it does feel to me like Labour is running very strongly on very pro-female issues, healthcare, Medicare, things of that nature. Tell me about this sort of the gender divide more broadly that you were seeing in your numbers, because I know in the United States there's a massive gender gap between men and women voters. Are we seeing the same thing here? And it feels like we probably don't actually want that because it's going to be quite divisive for society.
We're seeing a gender split on various issues, cost of living, because the fact is a lot of mums are bearing a lot of their burden and pressure on that. They're prioritising the needs of others in their family above their own, particularly with healthcare, and we've discussed this recently on the show, James. But you know, you get these wonderful quotes in focus groups from mums about, you know, the pressure they're feeling, the stress, you know, and they're wonderfully descriptive and give you a great sense of the enormous anxiety and economic disempowerment out there, and that is actually driving the vote towards the coalition. So there was a gender vote split in 2022, a very significant one, but that vote has improved since then, and it's off the basis of cost of living because mums in particular are screaming out for help. Nuclear is another 20-point split. Females are very negative towards nuclear. Men are more likely to accept it, but even that, it's not quite at the 50% level. So, yeah, you are seeing these split narratives throughout the entire campaign already.
Fascinating. Tony Barrett, we're going to have to leave it there. Tony Barrett from the Redbridge Group, thank you so much for joining me.